Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description. The Boy with Hacky by Donald Grimm. What if Luffy discovered his hacky at a young age, like when Shanks was around? Watch as a stronger, smarter Luffy emerges to take the Grand Line by storm with the power of the King's disposition. I don't own anything, adios.
Which one's Arlong? Shock. That was the only thing going through anyone's head when Luffy made his entrance. The people of Kokoyashi could attest to the strength of mermen, from bitter experience. A healthy male merman could crush rocks in his hands with minimal difficulties. Arlong was a monster among monsters, being able to lift whole buildings and chew concrete. Nonetheless, the united villagers could only stop and stare as they watched the foot-thick steel walls of Arlong Park fly off their hinges, crumbling into balls as they went through the air. All from a single punch from a lanky teenager. Said teenager had an oddly calm look on his face. He had a goal, and he was going to get it. People tend to forget the benefits of being simple-minded. You never bother to complicate things. Arlong had hurt his crew. Arlong had made Nami suffer. Come hell or high water, Luffy was going to fix those problems. He strode forward, cracking his knuckles without saying a word. He also made sure to keep a calm head. It had been said countless times, but it must be repeated. Hacky was dangerous. Luffy could still recall the days of his childhood, when the world was smaller and life much simpler. Hacky had been a toy, a cool thing only he could do. Luffy had, with childish abandon, explored his new power, marveling over every little detail. Then, the wonder gradually was worn away, to have caution and fears take its place. It had started when he and Ace, his brother in all but blood, had been roughhousing and Luffy just couldn't seem to win. In a fit of jealous rage, Luffy had used every single dreg of hacky that he could muster at once, his young mind concerned only with wiping the victorious smirk off Ace's face. The Pirate King's son was sent to the hospital in a coma with every bone in his body broken, as if some angry god had crushed him in its fist. Luffy could still feel the numb shock he'd experienced as he sat by Ace's bedside, watching him sleep the rest of the dead while all but mummified by bandages and casts. It had been too much, two big slices of harsh reality for his mind to even fumble for, let alone grasp. Hacky was supposed to be all fun, his little trick. It wasn't supposed to hurt people. It wasn't supposed to hurt Ace. Luffy had spent months despondent, barely speaking, his mind trapped in a never-ending downward spiral that centered on the terrible, inescapable truth that he had killed Ace. When Ace woke up, Luffy had hugged him so hard that he almost crushed his ribcage all over again. From that day forward, Luffy was changed, one fundamental part of his being gone forever, his innocence. Luffy trained harder, spent more time learning his hacky, made jokes and acted like an idiot for his friends, but gone was the childish belief that everything would work out fine. Luffy had caught his first glimpse of the real world that day with Ace, and it had set in a domino effect that had led to Luffy today. Idiotic, but not dumb, strong, but not arrogant, vengeful, but not judgmental. Luffy knew he had power, and he took pains to control that power. He made sure that he would never, ever fall down that bottomless ledge he had towed when he'd lost his temper with Ace. In a snap, Luffy was back in the present. That was why he would use his fists to kill Arlong. A duel had honor. A duel was fair. Using hacky wouldn't make this a fight. It would make it an execution. So, even though some dark part of his soul was screaming at him to annihilate his enemies, Luffy did nothing more than crack his knuckles. Arlong himself was observing Luffy with disbelief. It just didn't match up in his head. There was no way this kid was just walking into a base full of mermen, while ruining their front door. No one was that idiotic. Suicidal, possibly, but Arlong could tell by the simmering fire in this kid's eyes that he wasn't intending on abandoning his life anytime soon. So, assuming he wasn't suicidal or retard, and drawing the conclusion left by the crumbled gates, this kid honestly believed he could take on Arlong and his crew. The idea was so inconceivable that Arlong simply refused to accept it. Arlong. That would be my name. And who would you be? The Sharkman asked, answering the question. Luffy's eyes locked on his, and he adjusted his course to walk towards the throne Arlong was sitting in. I'm Luffy. A pirate, Luffy answered, slowly gathering his energies even as he engaged in the almost obligatory banter. Once Luffy got within a certain distance of Arlong, who was regarding him like he was an odd amusement, two mermen blocked his path. Oi, mister, you can't just walk in here, one of them said, literally looking down on Luffy, though you could tell he was a bit nervous. Luffy was already emitting his intimidation vibes from how much anger-fueled hacky he was holding back. The merman's fellow was of a similar type. What business does some random pirate have with Arlong-sama, huh? He asked. Luffy did not as much as look at them. He merely grabbed their heads in his hands, and brought them together hard enough for the sound of cracking bone to be heard. Arlong's eyes widened as he watched his two nakama collapse in a heap. Nami would savor the next few moments for the rest of her life. When her world was imploding and life seemed out to get her, she would recall this moment in time, and have a little laugh.
As Luffy cocked his fist, Nami spoke, her voice reverberating across the shocked and silent courtyard. Arlong, I'd like you to meet my captain. Luffy then punched Arlong so hard that he literally flew horizontally into the wall 20 meters away, reducing a portion of the wall to rubble. The looks of shock, surprise, and just a smattering of fear on the crew's faces were infinitely satisfying to Nami.
As the dust cloud cleared, revealing a shaken but otherwise fine Arlong, Luffy spoke, his words laced with an otherworldly rage. You hurt my Nakama. You used her and made her miserable. Luffy raised his head, and unleashed a relatively mild wave of hacky, while he intoned, you will pay. Death himself would have been less intimidating than Luffy in that one moment. Oi, Luffy, quit being so melodramatic. We're pirates, not actors, or dumb liars for that matter, Zoro grumbled, appearing at his captain's side, freaking out the audience even more with his speed. Usopp spoke up from his spot near the wall, actually having a legitimate excuse for hanging back due to his focus on ranged attacks. That hurts, Zoro. That hurt me real deep. Zoro glared with annoyance at the marksman. You'll get over it, he retorted, causing Usopp to cry animate tears of underappreciation.
The mermen, who so far had been watching the events like it was some terribly engaging soap opera, seemed to have a collective, light bulb, moment.
How dare you hurt Arlong-sama? They yelled, rushing towards the nonchalant captain and first mate. Just when they were about to hit, they were all shot out of the air by an incredible barrage of kicks. You weaklings stay out of the way, Sanji said, straightening his tie. Jin strode forward then, twirling his tonfa in boredom. Not that I don't appreciate a good macho standoff, but what was with that solo walk in here? We wouldn't want you hogging all the prey, now would we? Luffy just shrugged. I'm captain. I get to go first. Whereas before the veteran members of the crew would have simply humored Luffy, now they merely acquiesced. Luffy had given them a taste of how strong he truly was, and the awe and fear that had inspired was still there, not yet faded into the background of crew life. Nijiko chose that time to snap, seeing only the surface with no idea of the multiple layers underneath. What the hell is with these guys? They just attacked Arlong and his crew, and they're acting like this is just some kind of game. Nami, are these guys serious? Nami regarded her adoptive sister, and gave an amused chuckle. Nijiko, the first thing you need to understand about my crew. We are all fun-loving idiots, who just happen to be insanely strong in our given fields. I'd be worried if they were of kids. It's annoying, but it works. That being said, just sits back and enjoys the show. Nami and Usopp were really the support types, hardly needed but they're just in case. The remaining mermen, who had also been brain dead up to this point, spontaneously recovered their intelligence. Hatchin pointed at Zoro. Ah, there he is, the mystery swordsman. He rode me, I gave him a ride. Unaware of the embarrassing connotations his words had, Hatchin proceeded to notice Usopp. Ah, what's with that long nose? He's still alive. But Nami killed him. Hatchin then paused, finally seeming to notice the mob just outside the gates. Seriously, it amazed me to no end that they didn't notice until Chu was chasing Usopp. Why is Nami-san here with an angry mob behind her? The octopus asked dumbly, apparently unable to deal with all this new information and still speak intelligently. Karubi snarled, glaring at Nami with loathing and contempt. I knew it. So, you really are a traitor, Nami. What Nami did next almost gave the Kokoyashi villagers, and Usopp, heart attacks. She pulled her eyelid down, while sticking out her tongue. Yep, I decided to stab you guys in the back. Got a problem with that? Karubi seemed shocked into silence, while Luffy's respiratory system started to collapse as he gave into extreme levels of laughter. Sanji, of course, went into heart mode, while Jin and Zoro both held smiles of varying amusement. Nami herself had never had this much fun. The scene was broken by the arrival of two monsters of the deep. Out of nowhere, Thrasher and the sea cow Luffy had run into rose up from the sea. Standing on top of the cow's head was a brand new merman no one had seen yet. Whereas Arlong seemed to be vaguely related to a swordfish, this guy was obviously a purebred. While still being ridiculously tall compared to a human, this merman lacked the general bulk of the rest of the crew, being very streamlined. His nose was also a good foot long, and ended in a needle-sharp point. His skin was silvery, and he lacked any hair.
The man, oblivious to his surroundings, shouted out in a very Usopp-esque manner, Arlong-sama. I'm back with that sea king you gave me. Man, he was a tough one. But, I, Kajiki the sea beast tamer, have once again proven victorious. This thing will hop when you say hop. What should we name? What in the name of Poseidon has happened here? Kajiki had just taken notice of the chaos of Arlong Park, unaware that he had unknowingly just signed his death warrant.
Luffy was seeing red. Something was wrong with Thrasher. The giant serpent was looking at Luffy like he was a dumb animal. This guy had messed with his pet, there would be no innocence. Excuse me, Luffy said, freaking out everyone there, particularly the Straw Hats. They could practically smell the hacky Luffy was holding back at that moment. Thrasher and I have some issues to work out. With that, Luffy launched himself through the air towards Kajiki. Said idiot squealed like a little girl, sufficiently freaked out by this new enemy, before hopping off the sea cow's head and landing on Thrasher's. "Get me out of here," Kajiki yelled at Thrasher, who complied in a mechanical manner. Luffy landed on the sea cow, who was appropriately scared shitless by the level of hacky that Luffy was now unconsciously unleashing. "Follow them," he commanded, and the cow swam after the fleeing Kajiki like his big life depended on it. The giant mammal could feel the hacky on an instinctual level that beings up the cognitive ladder could not reach, and was in a way even more afraid than the humans and mermen witnessing the event. And it was that very fear that led Momoa, the loyal pet of Arlong, to forget all his training and carry Luffy after Kajiki. The Straw Hat crew, left on the shore against Arlong's crew, was broken from their brief shock by the sound of Karubi's voice. "Well, it seems like it's time that we fight back. You hang back, Arlong-sama. Arlong Park would surely crumble were you to fight now." The crew watched as Arlong's lieutenants started to prepare for battle, while about a third of the merman crew that was still conscious gathered behind them. Arlong watching it all with a calm arrogance, seemingly unfazed by Luffy's punch. Sanji spoke, claiming his own kill for himself. "I'll take that big one. He'll pay for insulting Nami-san." Zoro shrugged, before drawing his blades and trying to ignore his injury. "Fine with me. I want that octopus." Jin shrugged, swinging his tonfa to build up momentum. "I'm fine with the small fry. That leaves the weirdo with the lips-to-nose San and the lady." So saying, each opponent stared each other down, though Usopp was quite obviously shaking in his boots. Then, by some unseen signal, the two crews attacked. And thus the Straw Hat crew got their first taste of the Grand Line's power. Nami and Usopp, in what was quickly becoming routine, were teaming up. Their opponent was Chu, Arlong's marksman. Thankfully, the villagers of Kokoyashi had realized that they really were just there as witnesses, and that they wouldn't actually be doing any fighting. And so, they had broken into two groups and moved to the side of the road, giving Nami and Usopp room to maneuver. Nami, who in all honesty was a tad high on endorphins and wasn't entirely there, was warming up with her staff, while Usopp was trying to reduce his shakes to at least the level needed to shoot straight. Chu regarded them with obvious contempt. "You really disappoint me, Nami-san. You know better than any human here the invincibility of the merman. Arlong-sama favors you. You could have had anything you'd ever wanted. Clothing, jewelry, libraries of rare maps. Instead, you betray us and align yourself with this no-name crew. Not only that, you provoked rebellion among the villagers of Kokoyashi. You're defying nature by standing up like this." Nami glared at Chu, years of pent-up anger and hatred mingling with her hacky as it came out of her infrequent pulses, like some ethereal heartbeat.
The air around her became loaded with her inner feelings, making those around her feel like they were breathing the fumes off an enraged beast. Chu appeared unimpressed. The people of Kokoyashi watched Nami in fear and awe, while Usopp barely even noticed, this being an almost daily occurrence on the ship. Nami glared Chu in the eye. "I couldn't care less about nature or whatever. My nakama have shown me how to be strong. Get this through your head. You are going down." Usopp glanced at Nami from the corner of his eye. "Oi, Nami, aren't you laying it on a little thick? This guy's a merman, and we're still the weakest on the crew, even compared to the new guys." Nami's response was to shrug. "Yeah, but our crew is so strong it's stupid. The two of us are enough to take on this guy. He's the weakest out of Arlong's lieutenants for a reason." This seemed to light a fire under Chu's anger. He started cracking his neck, preparing himself for his water attacks. Nami settled into her stance, while Usopp, giving in to the inevitable, pulled back his slingshot in preparation for the first shot. Jen watched with bated breath. "Nami, you have found some powerful nakama, and this new power of yours are frightening." But Jen turned his gaze to Chu, Arlong's third mate, whose powerful water blasts had leveled the forest that once occupied the space of Arlong Park. "Is it enough for you to take on this enemy?" Jen's thoughts were mirrored in Nijiko's, who was watching Nami with fear in her heart. The tattooed brunette had comforted Nami during the long decade she had spent honing her thievery skills. The sister she had held was a stubborn yet miserable girl in way over her head. Standing in front of Nijiko was a proud, confident woman who wasn't going to take any bullshit whatsoever. Nijiko just couldn't wrap her head around this new Nami, and so was even more afraid than she would normally have been. Her fear of Nami coming to harm joined by her fear of Nami, period. Nami, quasi-surprisingly, made the first move. She dashed forward, staff to build momentum. As Chu's mouth started to swell, Nami smirked and murmured to herself, "Large blast, 12 o'clock. Right on cue, a large ball of water came straight at Nami, who was already dodging. "Block, high kick," Nami continued in a smug tone, speaking just before Chu brought up his arms to block her staff. Nami then threw herself to the left, dodging the kick Chu had aimed at her chest. Before Chu could react,
Nami ducked, allowing Usopp's well-aimed shot to impact Chu's right eye. Chu clutched his eye in agony, though he remarkably stayed silent. Chu was glaring at Nami, who appeared cool as a cucumber. "What dirty trick are you using, human?" the archerfish merman asked hotly, assuming Nami was cheating in some way. Nami grinned like a pleased cat, unknowingly heralding her future nickname. "What's the matter, Chu? Surely the superiority of mermen would trump my little psychic thing? I mean, you should be so awesome and invincible that my knowing what you're doing before you do shouldn't matter." All of this was said in a sarcastic tone that even Luffy would notice. Chu growled as only those deeply connected with nature could, a predator's snarl that normal humans simply could not recreate. Enraged, Chu took the special canteen he always carried and filled his mouth to bursting. Nami watched, the playful glee leaving her expression as she got serious. "This could hurt. Usopp, I'd suggest you move a few steps to your left." The marksman, having seen time and again on the ship Nami's ability, knew that he should follow the order. As Usopp got out of dodge, Nami calmed her breathing, tensing her body to avoid the attack to come. The canteen was a black market device based off one of marine science captain Vegapunk's vaguer ideas. In layman's terms, the bottle was about 10 times bigger on the inside than the outside. Chu drained it dry, his body expanding like a balloon from so much water. Nami was surprised Chu was using this so soon, since it was his strongest attack in a major make-it-or-break-it tactic. Chu must have been confident it would take her out. The confidence was deserved. Nami wasn't sure she could make it. Well, too late to back out now. Gathering her courage, Nami yelled, "Bring it on, you bottom feeder." Chu's eyes flashed in anger. That was a serious merman insult. "100-shot water gun," Chu proclaimed, before expelling all his water in the form of rapid-fire water bullets. Having ensured Usopp's safety by keeping the attention on herself, Nami could only hope to dodge. And so, Nami began her desperate dance. Knowing when and where the shots were coming was a major advantage, but Nami wasn't some dancer or speed freak. She avoided each shot by the skin of her teeth. If she'd been alone, she'd have been screwed. As it was, Nami only risked death for 8 seconds. A bottle of liquor was thrown from Usopp's hand straight for Chu's death. With the ease of born talent, Usopp lined up his shot even as Chu was turning to face the projectile. "Eat this." Kyaku Boshi. The gunpowder pellet flew through the air, piercing the bottle just as it came within range of Chu's face. The powder ignited, its explosive force tripled by the accelerant that was the alcohol. Usopp's unconventional Molotov cocktail coated Chu in liquid fire. Nami watched with cold eyes as Chu started screaming in pain, his sensitive merman skin going up like a torch. Sweating from her brief but intense exertion of dodging, Nami gathered herself before dashing forward. Her staff was soon stuffed with hacky as Nami brought the weapon around like a baseball bat. "This is for Kokoyashi, Nami's vengeance." With that, Nami's staff squarely hit Chu's face, sending his body twirling through the air from the force behind the blow. He landed in the courtyard pool. When he resurfaced, it was his back that floated up. Nami stood frozen before the toll of the battle caught up with her. Trembling with the aftereffects of adrenaline, Nami fell to the ground, barely managing to remain dignified and do so like a lady. Usopp came forward and laid a supporting hand on the navigator's shoulder. Nami looked up at Usopp, before laughing in relief. She'd finally done it. She'd gotten back at Arlong's crew, even if it was only at a lieutenant. Nami faced the battles in the courtyard, the last vestiges of her old life falling away, like a butterfly breaking free from its cocoon. Jin was definitely having trouble. The policy of the Krieg pirates had generally been throwing a bunch of numbers at a crowd and hoping for the best. Only Krieg had possessed the necessary firepower to take on multiple opponents. Jin's focus had been the heartless slaughter of the stronger pirates one at a time. However, he was currently surrounded by a bunch of opponents stronger than any man he'd ever faced. Hindsight was an absolute bitch. Look on the bright side, the ex-commander thought to himself bitterly. I'm learning how to fight off crowds. I'd just like it more if it wasn't in a do-or-die situation. While Jin was certainly out of his element, he was still putting up a decent fight. And, hey, his job was to distract the grunts while all the heavy hitters were being taken out. Jin wasn't going to allow himself to fail at his first real job on his new crew. Out of the corner of his eye, Jin watched the battles that Sanji and Zoro were going through. Zoro looked like he'd gotten the short end of the stick. His opponent insisted on ridiculous tactics that did nothing more than waste Zoro's energy. Considering how much of that was being leached by his barely healed wound, that wasn't a good thing. However, Jin knew better than to help the ailing swordsman. If there was one thing Mihawk's duel had taught Jin about Zoro, it was the man's sense of pride. He'd take any assistance as the greatest insult one could give. Sanji, on the other hand, was toying with his opponent. The two were of equal strength, but Sanji was infinitely more flexible as well as quicker. The smoking chef was engaged in a virtual dance of dodges and counters, his extraordinary kicks hitting the merman in a deadly barrage of combos. Before Jin's eyes, the blonde ducked under yet another of the lieutenant's otherwise formidable punches. The manta ray merman had overextended, and Sanji capitalized on it. Coming up from the merman's blind side, Sanji screamed, "Muton shot," as he delivered an almighty kick to his enemy's side, sending him careening through the walls of Arlong Park before he landed on the other side. Jin sensed hacky in the kick, and for a brief moment felt pity for Karubi. Agony wouldn't come close to describing the pain he must be feeling. As if Sanji's victory was some sort of signal, Zoro's fight became much more intense. Zoro charged forward towards Hatchin, suddenly coated in a hazy outline. The octopus, unaware of the fact that Zoro had taken the fight up a notch, merely grinned cheekily as he waved his 6 swords with moderate skill. "When will you realize, Roronoa-chan? I am a merman, and you're a human. I can wield 6 swords to your 3. There's no way you can win." So saying, Hatchin chose to end the fight and swung all of his swords in broad arcs that would slice Zoro to ribbons. Zoro glared at Hatchin, before he vanished before the fellow swordsman's eyes, the merman's blades passing through thin air. Hatchin blinked, before he started looking around wildly for his opponent. "There's something you don't understand," Zoro whispered into Hatchin's ear, his voice as cold, harsh and unforgiving as the heart of winter. The octopus gasped, and futilely tried to turn around to face his enemy. Zoro continued, his face devoid of all emotion except for a blank, single-minded focus. The Rokutoryu user was nothing more than an obstacle, an impediment to be removed. There is a world's difference between wielding 3 swords and using Santoryu. Akuma Tatsumaki. With that, Zoro concentrated all his energies into his core, and unleashed them in a torrent as he spun on the spot, his sword's tools to bend nature to his whims as they stirred it into a whirlwind of slicing wind. An opaque wall of hurricane-force wind swept Hatchin off his feet and swung him into the air remorselessly, wounds opening across the merman's body as if he were being tortured by invisible demons. And all the while, Zoro stood in the center of the gale, the shadow of the wind and the distortion of the hacky serving to twist his outline into that of a monstrous creature. The demon had shown his true colors and delivered wrath upon his enemies. The wind dissipated, and a full second later Hatchin landed on the ground. A spider web of cracks, originating from the point of impact, appeared in the concrete. The octopus was a mess, looking as if he'd been thrown into the shredder. Cuts of all sizes, depths, and raggedness covered his body, making him look more like a bloody carcass than a merman. In some divine symmetry, the merman's swords all fell near his hands, burying themselves into the ground. Any closer and the octopus would have been crucified. Zoro didn't exactly fall limp to the ground, but he came close. His swords clattering to the ground, the moss head took a well-deserved rest. Jin was fine with that. His problem was solved. The fringes of Zoro's mini-cyclone had taken out a good chunk of the grunts with debilitating slashes. The remainder left had been so demoralized that they barely put up a defense to Jin's crushing blows. In short order, the common pillagers of Arlong's crew had fallen to the cannonball tonfa. Jin surveyed his handiwork, grinning to himself. "Damn, I'm good." Sanji took a drag from his cigarette, acting as if taking down pirates was a daily occurrence for him. It wasn't an act though, it was the truth. Tempting lung cancer, the cook turned to face Zoro. "Wow, you look beat. It's not like you had a tough guy to fight. Is the demon out of shape?" Zoro delivered his best death glare, the one where his pupils disappeared and his smoky irises were brought into full focus. "You're one to talk, Arrow Cook. It took you how long to take down that musclehead? Were you too busy trying to ogle the navigator?" Sanji took the jab good-naturedly, i.e. he bonked Zoro on the head with a boot. Zoro growled, but didn't feel the need to waste his energy seeking payback. This friendly, by their standards, exchange would have continued, had not a bone-chilling growl swept through them. Looking up, the 3 pirates found themselves facing the enraged face of Sawtooth Arlong. His eyes were filled with a mix of fiery anger, tempestuous remorse and cold hatred that all mixed together into the most frightening thing the Straw Hats had seen, surpassing even Luffy's transformation. Arlong had murder in his eyes, and the 3 battle-weary warriors were in his sights. There is an infinite string of connections and bonds, both physical and spiritual, which intertwine all that is, was, and will be. All of these bonds can be broken, rearranged, and in some cases changed. The only thing needed is energy. The only form of energy in existence that could affect both types of bonds was hacky, the energy of a person's soul given physical presence by the intensity of human will and emotion. In theory, a skilled enough user of hacky could become a god, rearranging everything around him with the force of his power. Not that Luffy had any idea about the fine mechanics behind all this. He just knew that he hacky could hit from a distance. The 2 pirates had been engaged in a constant chase of cat and mouse, their mounts either too brainwashed or too afraid to complain about the harsh exertion. Luffy held the advantage in that a glancing blow from him would ensure the merman's defeat. Said merman, however, could breathe underwater, which was the one place Luffy couldn't go, However, what the merman had certainly not counted on was the sonar-like pulses of hacky that Luffy constantly let loose from his nigh limitless stores of energy. Hacky, like sound and kinetic force, moved differently in water. In this case, it was condensed. If Luffy expelled a 1-second burst of moderate force, when it hit Kajiki it was a blow from a tank shell that lasted an instant. Kajiki would run away as far as he could while withstanding these attacks, before surfacing and running away once again. And all the while, the hacky wore away at the mental walls that Kajiki had instilled in Thrasher, gradually bringing back our favorite background character to his senses. "Give me a damn break," Kajiki roared in mild desperation, his odds becoming increasingly bleak as the Straw Hat Captain refused to stop chasing him. "What is your problem? It's just a dumb animal." Anger and frustration had robbed Kajiki of his common sense, apparently. No sane creature would dare risk antagonizing Luffy when he was already out for blood. Kajiki realized his brief lapse, but by then it was too late. Luffy was almost foaming at the mouth. His self-control, severely tried by the sight of his converted pet, broke. Whatever mercy that calm Luffy might have held disappeared as angry Luffy decided that it was time to end this. Cocking back a palm, Luffy stared with dead eyes into Kajiki's, who had turned to survey the boy's reaction, only to see his approaching doom. "You will never touch my friends again, Royal Strike." With that, Luffy threw a palm strike straight at Kajiki. Instead of stretching his hand, he merely let his compacted, fully focused hacky fly. Kajiki didn't even get the chance to scream as the raw force of an atomic bomb collided with his chest, reducing his ribs to dust and collapsing his internal organs right before he was thrown at speeds that broke the sound barrier through the air. He landed 20 clicks away, the water around him becoming stained a cloudy pink. Luffy stared at his palm, unaware of the fact that Momu had finally succumbed and fallen unconscious. Some small part of Luffy took a dark joy in what he'd just done, in meting out retribution to his enemies in the most violent way possible. The rest of Luffy was filled with self-loathing terror. As Luffy steadily sank closer to sea level, his thoughts whirled like an over-caffeinated hamster on his wheel, whirling frantically, getting nowhere. Gods, what am I? How can I hold this kind of power and not be some hideous monster? Maybe I am. I'm a freak of nature as it is. I'm not human anymore. I'm made from rubber. How is that in any way human? And the killing, how can it be so easy? Shouldn't it be a little harder to end a life? Maybe it's just because I'm good at it, which means I am a monster. Luffy's feet touched the water, but our hero didn't even notice the sudden leeching of his strength, too preoccupied with his self-destructive thoughts. How can I face my crew now? They've seen me now, seen what I'm keeping under this mask. How could they still see me as a nakama? No, they can't. No one loves a monster. The minute I return, they'll start hating me. Usopp, he gave up everything for me. How can he not hate me? Zoro, he sees everything as a threat. I'm not sure I could take him looking at me like that. And Nami, Luffy felt a deep ache in his chest as he thought of the red-headed navigator. He had no idea what his confused feelings for her meant. All he knew was that picturing her disgusted expression when she saw him, her words as she denounced him for the vile creature he was, felt like a knife in his heart. It was incredible how much one death could affect our happy-go-lucky captain, but death is never a good thing. Even when it's done for noble or necessary reasons, it does nothing but hurt those left behind. Life, the purest thing there was, wasn't meant to be ended prematurely. The act of taking another's life, of murder, left a vacuum in the natural order of things, a vacuum that sucked up every good or happy feeling it could find. Should a tyrant be put down, those loyal to him will still grieve. Should a thief be hanged, his family will feel the loss. Even those twisted souls that had nothing and meant nothing to anyone left a void, a dissonance in the natural harmony that would eventually right itself through a negative react-a-lane. No matter how soiled or abused, life is a gift that was never meant to be returned early. Just as Luffy was about to sink below the surface, something swam up beneath him to support him. The Royal Strike had been like an EMP on Kajiki's training, the hacky bypassing all the mental blocks to resonate with Thrasher and all his memories of Luffy. Restored to his senses, the oddly gentle beast comforted his friend as best he could. A Sea King doesn't feel the bonds of companionship. Lower fish fled with fear, and fellow Sea Kings were either rivals to intimidate or mates to impress and dominate. Thrasher had never known what it was to stand on equal ground with someone, until Luffy had come along. Determined to give him a second chance after he'd maimed Shanks, Luffy had slowly worked himself into Thrasher's life. The Predator had learned peace as the kind boy had taught him how to relax for the first time in his Darwinist lifestyle. Luffy felt the warmth of the scale beneath him and the low rumble of Thrasher's growl as he slowly returned to himself. Luffy looked down at his pet, absent-mindedly petting the large head he rested on. "Hey there, boy. You forgot about me for a little there." Thrasher gave what Luffy recognized as an apologetic whine. "It's okay. You weren't yourself." Luffy laid his head down, his self-doubt melting away with the presence of his pet. "You don't think I'm a monster, do you?" Luffy had to suppress a chuckle as Thrasher shook his head side to side incessantly, almost hurling the teenager back into the sea. "Thanks, boy. I needed that." Getting his feet under him, Luffy turned back towards Arlong Park, now a speck in the distance. "Come on, Thrasher. Time to kick Arlong's ass." Jin fell back, his spine straight as he landed spread eagle on the ground. It would have seemed relaxed if it weren't for the fact that his floating ribs were snapped like twigs. You could see the ugly, unnatural bulges in his skin through his jacket. The ex-battle commander stared at the sky, his eyes hazy with pain. Lying down seemed good. It hurt too damn much to do anything else. He didn't scream, not out of manliness, but simply because he didn't have enough air to waste on such a thing. Despite all this, Jin managed to maintain his wry sense of humor. "Alas, poor dignity. I knew thee well. To think, I was beaten by water." These were not the ramblings of a pain-hazed mind. Arlong had spent the past few minutes taking great joy as displaying the power of his natural element. Of course, no one had a frickin' clue how he did it. Nami and Usopp watched with mild horror from the sidelines, shocked at how easily their nakama had been felled. Usopp muttered, "What in the world is going on? It looks like he's just throwing around some water, but the guys look like they're being socked in the gut." Nami could only watch in mounting despair. All that effort to prove Arlong didn't own her, dragging all her friends and family here, only for her captor to tear her friends to metaphorical pieces. Using a puddle. Sanji clutched his chest, delivering his best one-eyed glower at the smugly grinning Arlong. "This is ridiculous. He's just splashing us, but it feels like a shotgun blast." Zoro grunted, lacking the focus to do anything else. The fever had risen, and the wound had reopened. Zoro was currently coasting in a fog of delirium, unable to form any coherent thought. Sanji could sense this, and growled to himself. Hell's bells, how was he supposed to protect a lady's honor when his enemy could cream him with a sprinkling of water? Arlong chuckled at Sanji, the sound itself one of the most malevolent things Sanji had ever heard. "Do you finally see? This is the difference between us. My species is superior. Nature has made me better in every aspect." Laughing maniacally, Arlong threw another batch of water. Sanji valiantly tried to charge, but he couldn't manage to avoid the nearly invisible drops. Just like Jin, Sanji collapsed. Enough was enough, and Sanji just couldn't take another blow like that. Zoro growled. He could literally feel the oppressive fog of the fever closing in on his thoughts. He had less than a minute until oblivion took him. Might as well make it count. The world shrank to the maniac in front of him, and Zoro charged. Swords lifted, rent the air, and were completely dodged by a grinning Arlong. Zoro pressed his increasingly feeble attack, but he just couldn't hit the surprisingly quick merman. Arlong grew tired of playing with the swordsman, and his hand lunged forward to catch his throat. Arlong chuckled as Zoro hung limp in his grip, lacking the strength to even struggle. The only sign that the swordsman was even conscious was the wholehearted, if weak, glare sent towards Arlong. The tyrant chuckled in amusement. "I must say, you are one of the biggest annoyances I've ever had to deal with. But what's with this little bandage of yours?" Arlong tore off the stained bandages, curious as to what the heck the former bounty hunter was hiding, and instantly regretted it. Gruesome didn't even begin to cover it. The cut was a perfect diagonal from Zoro's left shoulder to his right hip. The tanned skin and impressive musculature that attested to the man's training and commitment had parted seamlessly to shine light on that which was never meant to see the sun. Through the steady stream of blood that welled up from the wound, Arlong could just make out the off-white of bone and the grisly rainbow of various organ tissues. The merman was a sadistic harbinger of death and suffering, but even he had limits. No sequence of words existed that could properly describe how utterly wrong and nauseating this injury was. Arlong's hand loosened in shock. As Zoro wheezed in a frail attempt to regain his breath, Arlong had to fight down a mixture of bile and fear. This man, this puny human, had decimated one of his best men with that injury the entire time? It was impossible, and yet the evidence continued to stare Arlong in the face as Zoro's life essence was eagerly drunk up by the sun-cracked concrete of Arlong Park's courtyard. Nami felt ill. Revulsion demanded that she show everyone what she had for breakfast, yet guilt decreed that she deserved the burn of the bile in her throat. Zoro had helped her so much, fought against such strong opponents, while all the while he should have been in a hospital. Nami's rational side assured her that it was more Zoro's pride than his friendship with her that led to this, but the navigator felt disgusted with herself all the same. Usopp and the good portion of the villagers lacked the self-restraint Nami had. The stench of vomit permeated the air as people gave into sympathetic retching. Dr. Nako coped by going off on a tangent regarding the injury in relation to his professional sense of treatment. That young man is batshit insane, or else retarded. With that severe an injury, he should be in a theater or at least on medication. Any normal person would need a year to recover from that injury, if they did at all. Nijiko covered her eyes as her almost father Genzo held her, as they both felt their hopes start to wither under the onslaught of Arlong's continued victory. Arlong regained his composure, once again secure in his bloodthirsty persona. "Ah, does the little cut hurt the poor human?" he said, mocking him with every syllable. Arlong drew back his foot, and delivered a purely sadistic kick to Zoro's chest. The swordsman clenched his teeth, but even the Kokoyashi natives heard the animal-like sound of pain that escaped his lips. Usopp felt rage begin to coil in his chest as Arlong continued to torture Zoro in the cruelest way possible. It would have been kinder to kill Zoro. This was infinitely more demeaning. Usopp would be the first to admit that he was a coward, but when it came to his nakama, he had nerves that would make titanium seem like tin foil. Zoro was one of the people Usopp would trust his life with without any hesitation, and he refused to just sit there while this freak treated his nakama like some poor abused puppy. Usopp charged, eye gawk and fear from the people behind him. "Usopp Hammer," the proud liar screamed as he let loose his psychic battle cry. Hacky flew in a jangled tumble due to Usopp's chaotic emotions as he moved to beat Arlong's skull to mush. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Arlong looked up from every petty villain's wet dream to see the marksman fling himself at him. Arlong growled in frustration. When would these humans get the point? He was invincible. Just as Arlong drew back his fist to smash Usopp's face in, an unexpected third party intervened. "Usopp, duck, Gomu Gomu no whip." Usopp reacted instantly. "Captain's orders." Arlong barely had time to gasp before a sandaled foot with enough momentum to crack a boulder impacted with his chest. For the second time that day, the shark merman flew horizontal into a wall. A ragged cheer went up among the villagers, though some of them were still gagging. Usopp and Nami couldn't suppress their grins as Luffy jumped off Thrasher's head onto the ground of Arlong Park. Nami still had her doubts about Thrasher, but she was still delighted to see he was normal again. Disturbing or not, her captain's giant, playful guard dog of a serpent was a delightful constant in her experience as a Straw Hat, and she was glad to see the pet back to normal. Usopp was just glad that he didn't have to commit suicide anymore. Luffy cracked his knuckles as he glared at the slowly emerging Arlong. Luffy looked at the defeated forms of his nakama, and felt a cold fury grow in his gut. "Usopp, get these three out of here. I don't want them to get hurt in the fight." Usopp nodded, all too glad to back out now that Luffy was taking care of the problem. Usopp, with the help of Nami and Nejico, managed to get the injured Straw Hats out of dodge just as Arlong recovered. Arlong cracked his neck, while his scowl deepened. He might be arrogant, but he wasn't blind. The humans had been surprisingly strong, and they all deferred to this boy with respect. In Arlong's survival of the fittest world, that meant that Luffy was the strongest. The hits were good hints, as well. Arlong felt the rage built up in him at the continued efforts of the Straw Hats. They were like cockroaches. Still, Arlong tried to rein in the bestial fury. It wouldn't do to lose control. It would be a pain to rebuild the park. "So, you got your little pet back, for all the good it'll do you," the merman taunted, only to be met by a fist to the face. Luffy, it seemed, was not in the mood. Luffy drew his arm back, watching Arlong as he clutched his broken teeth. The Straw Hats, the conscious ones, at least, felt a small twinge of fear in their guts. This was not Luffy. It was not Luffy. Every line of the young pirate's body bespoke of restrained power, and all the tiny quirks that normally conveyed his happy-go-lucky attitude were absent. Luffy clutched his fist, his eyes nearly glowing under his bangs. His hat, at some point, had wound up in Nami's hands, where she clutched it tightly for comfort. Arlong swore under his breath. Then, of all things, he began to laugh. Laughter that was too close to insanity to be entirely comfortable rang through the air as the captain of the Arlong pirates held his shattered teeth. Luffy raised an eyebrow in mild confusion, and that eyebrow was joined by its brother as Arlong harshly jerked his own teeth right out of his mouth. Before their eyes, a new set of teeth grew back in within seconds. Arlong continued chuckling. "Sorry, did you forget I was a merman? I possess the power of the shark. My teeth will always grow back, stronger and stronger each time." So saying, the tyrant tore out two more sets of teeth, holding them like castanets in his hands. Luffy took his stance, ready for anything. To all those paying attention, it was clear that there was a heat haze around him. Oddly enough, none of the Straw Hats, those most attuned to Luffy's haki, could feel it. It was as if Luffy was refusing to let any of it go towards them. Before they could puzzle out what this could possibly mean, Arlong charged. Luffy dodged a swipe from Arlong's detached chompers, and kept on dodging as the madman kept right on coming. Luffy could tell that getting his with one of those strikes would be bad. Of course, he didn't actually think that. He was in fight mode, and his battle instincts had taken the controls in his brain. Luffy's caution proved well deserved, as he dragged his head to the side to avoid a particularly well-aimed jab. The teeth bit right through the concrete pillar behind him, crushing it into rubble. Nami bit her lip in anxiety. She had full confidence in Luffy, but so far he hadn't thrown a single hit. It seemed as if Arlong had him backed into a corner, though she knew that couldn't be true. What was her captain thinking? Arlong apparently came to the same conclusion. What, are you too scared to hit me, pathetic human? Fight back. I want to make you beg for mercy, not kill you without a fight. Arlong got a cruel grin as he thought of just the right buttons to push. You must be really weak. I mean, your crew is all so incredibly talented, for humans at least. That blondie can kick. The swordsman is decent enough. Even that sick-looking one can throw a punch. All you can do is dodge me. Nami must not have as much of a brain as I thought, if she left me for you. Look at you. You can't do anything except lean on those around you. Luffy's yelled suddenly, before blowing right through Arlong's defense to deliver a punishing blow to the chest. The air left Arlong's lungs in a rush as he was thrown back by one of the hardest punches he'd ever got. As Arlong picked himself up, oddly dizzy for some reason, Luffy's eyes bored into him as he spoke for the first time since the fight began. Of course I depend on others. I can't cook, I can't use swords, I can't navigate, and I can't twirl tonfa or navigate the sea. I can't even lie. Usopp didn't know whether to take that as an insult or a compliment. Luffy's voice was calm and steady as he continued with his little diatribe. I know that I can't do everything. That is why I surround myself with strong nakama I can depend on to do the things I can't. Arlong sneered, still trying to recover from the punch, though he'd never admit it hurt that much. That's my point, weakling. What can you do? Luffy looked straight into Arlong's eyes, and for the first time in years, the merman felt fear. Those eyes, they made death seem vibrant. They were so cold and lifeless, with no mercy or compassion whatsoever. The haze around the Fuchsia native rippled, as if a slumbering beast was awakening, as Luffy continued to stare unflinchingly into the Arlong's eyes. I can kill you, the Knot boy said in a very quiet voice, before he disappeared. Arlong's eyes widened, and he started to whip his neck around to look for the boy, but he needn't look that far. Luffy reappeared right in front of Arlong, oddly blurry. The rookie pirate pulled back his fists, before letting fly in a deadly barrage. Arlong felt his body lift off the ground from the force of the hits, but he didn't even have time to fly back as Luffy continued his assault. The pain was excruciating. Every blow felt like a cannonball, and at every impact, a shockwave of barely visible force flew out. If he had the presence of mind to capture the feeling with words, Arlong would have thought that the waves felt like tuning forks pressed directly to his skeleton, creating a piercing and unbearable ache with each pass. Luffy finished the combo with a roundhouse kick that sent Arlong into the water at about half the speed of sound. The entire process took about 3 seconds. Usopp and Nami were amazed. They knew that Luffy could keep pace with Kuro, but they hadn't realized just how fast their captain could be. They had also never seen him attack someone with so little restraint, not pulling any punches. Nami had lived in terror of Arlong since she was a child, and even she felt a twinge of worry for the merman. The blows, quite simply, were just too heavy to be considered human. The Kokoyashi villagers didn't know war or fall prostrate in awe. For so long, Arlong had appeared invincible. Now, Luffy was hitting harder, faster, and more ruthless than Arlong ever had. And it was obvious to them that he took no pleasure from it. A corpse would have been an open book compared to Luffy. His body betrayed no emotion. No sadistic joy, no empathy, nothing. He was like a vengeful god, a being beyond their understanding. I know I'm overdoing it, but I'm trying to capture their mindset. They lived under this dictator for a decade, and he gets toppled by a complete stranger. I feel that the fearful awe would simply transfer. Sanji, who had regained consciousness, started to reach for a cigarette. I have become the subordinate to a very complex man. First he's a kid, now he's an executioner. Maybe I should have thought this through. Jin, who didn't have the strength to sit up, merely watched in an odd kind of approval. You truly are above Krieg, Captain, the bodyguard whispered, ignoring the pain of talking. Luffy waited for Arlong to fight back. He could tell that the merman was still alive, and was just biding his time. Luffy focused on the flow of the hacky through him, and briefly contemplated the change he went through when he fully immersed himself. When he became both a pool and a conduit for this deeply spiritual and incredibly powerful force, he felt a change come over him. It was as if the hacky had a life of its own, a sentience that demanded its holder be colder, more regal, more like a king dealing with criminals of the state. No wonder it was called Haoshoku Hacky. The presence felt and acted like a king, and acted through the wielder. Before Luffy's thoughts could wander on a tangent about his quasi-bipolar personality, Arlong attacked. Quick as lightning, the giant launched out of the water, straight as an arrow with his deadly now pointed right at Luffy's chest. Luffy reacted. A blast of hacky, diamond hard in its density and concentration, collided with Arlong in midair. All of the rival captain's momentum was arrested, leaving him flailing in the air. Luffy took his chance. Jumping high in the sky, he brought his feet together, before lunging them in a deadly lance. Gomu Gomu no spear, the young man said levelly, his voice echoing with hacky as his feet drove Arlong a foot into the concrete and creating a large dust cloud. Gravity had just started to reclaim the boy as the cloud cleared, revealing a changed Arlong. Physically, he was the same, but his entire manner had changed. There was no restraint, no conscience, nothing but an incredible tension of anticipation. The gait of a predator. Arlong has surrendered himself to the beast within, and he enjoyed it. Enough with this. I'll kill you. Arlong lunged forward once more, much faster than before. Luffy couldn't dodge, and he was driven deep into the wall of Arlong Park from the aerial tackle. A sick grin on his face, Arlong punched right through the wall, and drew from the room within what appeared to be a giant saw. Nami gasped in horror. Kiribachi was only used when Arlong wanted to level everything in sight. Arlong grinned one more as he kicked Luffy straight up just as the pirate captain left his imprint in the wall. Luffy went flying up, Arlong following in a freakish roll, using his sword to literally climb up the tower. Once the two were level, Arlong delivered a crushing blow with Kiribachi, sending Luffy through the wall of Arlong Park into the interior. Nami noticed which room it was. 4th floor, last door on the left, that's my room. Luffy picked himself up, ignoring his injuries. Being made of rubber dulled most blood trauma, but he was still human. He would be covered in bruises tomorrow. For now, he was merely aching. Shaking his head to clear it, Luffy looked up from his sitting position into the insane eyes of Arlong. The merman held his sword to Luffy's neck, seemingly having the boy at his mercy. Luffy looked around, and took note of the room. The walls were covered with maps, and numerous atlases were stacked around a small work desk. Piles of hand-drawn maps were scattered across the room. Arlong chuckled, the hint of madness that existed before now fully apparent. Like the room. It's where Nami makes all my maps. That girl is pure genius. Mermen know the seas like the back of our hands, but we just can't write good maps. The redhead woman has a serious talent. That talent can only belong to me. I can use her so much better than you. Arlong chuckled to himself maniacally, unaware of the free-falling temperature within the room. Luffy felt disgust well up in him, as he realized the travesty that surrounded him. Luffy reached up and took hold of Kiribachi. Arlong frowned and tried to jerk it out of his grasp, only to widen his eyes in shock when his weapon didn't budge an inch. It was as if it were encased in steel. Luffy's eyes looked up into Arlong's, and this time the eyes were different, just as Arlong's had changed when he lost his cool. Luffy had transformed from a cheerful kid into a cold, unforgiving killer since he first entered Arlong Park. However, the boy had been cold the entire time, calm and in total control. Luffy's eyes burned with a white-hot, unholy anger that seared Arlong to the depths of his black heart. The Avenger God had become a devil. There was no other way to describe it. The look in Luffy's eyes promised untold suffering that Arlong would not wish on his worst enemy, suffering that would make strong men weep, break proud shoulders, and reduce the victim into a crying, hysterical heap on the ground begging for death to make the pain stop. For a start. Use? Luffy asked, his voice conveying the fury he felt inside. Fast as thought, the growing king stood up, ripped Kiribachi out of Arlong's hands, and used it to slice half the room's contents in half in one rough motion. Tossing the saw with enough force to implant it in the wall to the hilt, Luffy proceeded to smash the paper, the icons of Nami's suffering and slavery, into unrecognizable pulp. Arlong gasped, his mind blank in a complete, irrational fear. You can't do this, my maps, he protested weakly, only to wish he hadn't as those burning coals turned once more on him. Luffy's voice roared with fury and power as he faced down Arlong in his inner sanctum and drove him to his knees. This room is Nami's suffering. I will destroy it and you with it. With that, Luffy sent his leg straight up, right through the roof to the sky above. As he did, his leg blurred and morphed as more hacky than Luffy had ever called encased it completely. In the aftermath, onlookers would swear to all they believed in that the leg they had seen exit the roof had turned into a wide blade, sharp and heavy enough to split the earth and allow Mother Nature to bleed for the first time in millennia. They would then speak of an almighty voice rending the air, the voice of ultimate, unforgiving authority and the omnipotent power that came with it. Royal Guillotine. With that great cry, the blade descended with all the finality of fate itself. The spectators of this legendary fight, the villagers of Kokoyashi and the Nakama of its victor, covered their eyes as Arlong Park was completely and utterly destroyed by this ultimate attack. Nami stood frozen as the crowd behind her broke and fled. Nami, we've got to get out of here, Nejiko yelled, as Usopp, Genzo, and Dr. Neko grabbed the defeated Straw Hats and carried them away. Nami resisted her sister's pull, her eyes fixed on the imploding building in front of her. Luffy, she screamed in her head, all her thoughts concerned with worry and fear for the fate of the captain that had transcended humanity to help her. Nami had heard tales of those that ruled the Grand Line, great men that could topple mountains with one punch. Never before had she believed that level of power was accessible, until now. It took a full 10 minutes for the ear-shattering rumble to die down and the dust to clear. The villagers and the Straw Hats hesitantly approached, searching desperately for some sign of their hero. Nami was just about to rubble that once was Arlong Park over to find Luffy, when he appeared. Rising from the ashes of his victory, the future Pirate King stood tall among the wreckage around him. His eyes locked onto Nami's, and even across the distance she felt an electric thrill go up her spine. Luffy slowly smiled, as the conquering king let go of his power and became mortal once more. Not Luffy was gone. The heir of D was back once more. Throwing back his head, the boy yelled at the top of his lungs, proclaiming his feelings for the world to hear. "Nami, you are my nakama." Nami grinned, and brought up a hand to try and hide her tears. But these were not tears of sorrow. Nami was crying with joy, for the first time in her life. All the tension, fear, and burdens she had carried over the years fell off at once, leaving the woman feeling free for the first time in 7 long years. Luffy walked out of the ground zero he created, as the villagers of Kokoyashi slowly grasped the reality they were faced with. A cheer broke out, which soon grew and tumbled like thunder until it was an undulation that shook the sky. Arlong Park has fallen. The crowd rushed forward, leaving the Straw Hats to watch in amusement as their captain was mobbed by grateful villagers. Zoro, who had recovered slightly from his torture, cracked a grin. Jin and Usopp got up and did a merry jig, the former Krieg miraculously revived by the power of laughter, and Sanji took a slow, relaxing drag as he smiled. Luffy couldn't help but laugh with childlike joy as the crowd threw him up in the air over and over. They fumbled the catch and he landed headfirst on the ground. He merely laughed it off. Luffy always loved the time immediately after a battle. Still on a rush the size of the Grand Line, but with no battle to dull the feeling, everything seemed bright and vibrant. Luffy rubbed his head in a casual gesture, only to feel a familiar object be pressed onto his head. He looked up, into the smiling face of Nami. Luffy grinned back, and stood up. He was about to open his mouth to say something, when Nami rushed in and hugged him with all the strength in her body. Surprised, but certainly not complaining, Luffy hugged her back. It was a perfect moment of victory, friendship, and simple joy in holding someone close. So, of course, something had to come along and ruin it. Ain't no rest for the wicked, after all. My, it seems that you've done my work for me. How kind of you, Captain Nezumi sneered, backed by his contingent of Marines. Everyone turned to stare at the man, and in most cases it was a glare. Luffy himself felt irrationally frustrated that this man had interrupted his moment with Nami. Unaware of his encroaching doom, the rat-faced man continued. "This is my perfect day. All I have to do is remove you. Bring in Arlong, and I'll have all the money to myself." The extraordinarily arrogant man continued to laugh in that incredibly annoying way, until someone tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, annoyed, only to have his heart stop when he looked into the merciless eyes of Zoro. "People are rejoicing. Don't interrupt them." Nezumi looked past the man, and paled drastically when he saw all of his men down. How on earth had this no-name taken down all his men? Nezumi suddenly got a sub-zero chill down his spine, and he hesitantly turned around into the pissed-off faces of the Straw Hat Pirates and the villagers of Kokoyashi. The man whimpered. The next 10 minutes or so were spent delightfully pummeling Nezumi into a bloody pulp. Aware of the corruption of this particular marine, the people of Kokoyashi cheered them on. When the pirates finally let up, Nezumi looked like a modern art piece meant to reflect the abuse of the soul. Nami, who had stayed back so far as to better cackle, picked the man up by his left ear. "You're going to pay back these villagers for all the money Arlong has stolen. You will never come here ever again. And one more things." The shadow of a demon appeared behind Nami, as she embraced her inner nature. "Give me back my money," she yelled, punting Nezumi as she did. The corrupt captain positively flew across the water. He regained consciousness when he hit the water, and he took his chance to threaten them with no backing. "You, Straw Hat, I'll make you pay for this. There won't be a bounty hunter or marine that won't know your name, you hear me? You will be hunted down if it's the last thing I do." His answer was the hurling of his men straight at him. Screaming like a little girl, the man fled, leaving his assaulters to laugh their asses off. "How do you think he knew I'd be Pirate King?" Luffy asked, only to make his crew laugh even harder. Nami laughed the loudest out of all of them, reveling in the feeling. The villagers of Kokoyashi dispersed, eager to spread the news of their salvation to every corner of the island. Arlong Park had fallen, they were free. When Kami Island threw a party, it threw it into the stratosphere. It was the 3rd day of non-stop celebration, and every second had been spent with the joyous citizens getting drunk on freedom, happiness, and good, booze. Every one of the Straw Hats was treated as guests of royalty. Luffy had been allowed to eat to his heart's content, and had thus eaten the island out of the next 10 years, not that anyone cared. Sanji had been flirting with every girl in sight, and since he had taken part in the liberation, some of the women actually paid attention to him. Usopp became the official conductor of the nightly festivities, yelling his heroic tales and the soundtracks to them until he went hoarse. Jin and Zoro, after being treated, which was not fun, spent most of their time in quiet corners, drinking calmly with smiles on their faces. Nami, on the other hand, well, no one could find her. Dr. Neko said he'd seen her when she came in for tattoo removal, which made perfect sense to everyone who knew her. However, she seemed to have disappeared after the operation, leaving her friends curious, and in some cases worried. Sanji was the sole member of the latter party, everyone else knowing that Nami needed some time to adjust to everything. In between feasts, Luffy wondered where she was, but he'd get distracted by the latest course. Finally, near midnight, the redhead finally turned up. Luffy, who was full for the first time he could remember, was relatively calm, trying an exotic brew while listening to the music. The navigator walked up to him from the side, and tapped him on the shoulder. Luffy turned to her, and couldn't suppress the smile that spread across his face. "Nami, we've been looking for you. Where you been?" Nami smiled, and Luffy was struck speechless by how beautiful she looked. Not that he understood any of his feelings for her. He was completely clueless about women, as he was on most subjects. In his defense, women were inarguably the most subtle, complex creatures on the face of the planet. The redhead answered, "Oh, I've just been taking care of some stuff." Saying goodbye, she trailed off, and Luffy could see a fondness in her eyes that told him she was thinking of her family. Just then, the music slowed down considerably, and a lone violinist stepped forward, before he began to play a haunting, mellow tune. It was rich and vibrant, no less dull than it would be if it were played as a jig. It took Luffy a second, but he recognized the waltz. "Oh, Shanks used to sing this all the time. He said that it went out of style before he was born, but it used to be a kind of anthem for pirates." Nami grinned as Luffy energetically recalled his childhood hero. She herself found the tune delightful. Nami looked around, and noticed all the couples dancing. A nervous little flutter took home in her belly. She couldn't help but remember the disembodied shove she was certain Belmere had given her. Nami was certain that her mother's spirit was encouraging her to do what her heart told her. And right now, her heart was screaming at her to dance with Luffy. Nami looked back at the boy, almost like she was measuring him. Luffy didn't notice. Nami was attracted to the boyish pirate, both for his bumbling charm and his obvious strength. There wouldn't be any harm in exploring how far a potential relationship could go. However, she was hesitant. Despite her mild seduction skills, she was as inexperienced as Luffy. She'd never had the time, energy, or inclination to have any significant other. But she couldn't deny that she wanted to get close to Luffy. How close and in what way, she wasn't sure. Nami took a deep breath, and took the plunge. "Luffy, would you like to dance?" Luffy blinked at Nami, his words dying in his throat. Something seemed to have snapped in his brain when Nami asked him that question. His libido, long ignored and unnoticed, leapt at the chance. Luffy found himself holding Nami to his chest and swaying slightly to the beat of the mild waltz. The boy briefly wondered why the hell he was doing this, but then he breathed in the scent of Nami's hair, and suddenly he didn't care. The slightly awkward couple didn't do much dancing, barely moving side to side with the tempo. Both couldn't have cared less. They both felt a wondrous delight in moving with the other, and none of them felt any urge to stop anytime soon. Jin, who was watching from afar, grinned and nudged Zoro next to him. The first mate looked at the couple, and grumbled. "Great, now we've got to deal with a hormonal Luffy." If one looked closely, however, one would notice the slight grin on the swordsman's face. Usopp saw them out of the corner of his eye, but decided that it wasn't any of his business. Sanji sank to the ground crying when he caught sight of them, but swiftly forgot when a pretty brunette held him and asked what was wrong. The music slowly died down, as the victors slowly fell asleep, the party of their victory and the newfound freedom of Nami's homeland coming to a close. Both the captain and his navigator slept with smiles on their faces, remembering the embrace of the other. The day was slow, hot, and boring. At least, it was for the veteran Straw Hats. For Sanji and Jin, it was hell on earth. The two poor, unfortunate souls had asked Luffy how to use hacky and, well, we've already gone over this. While Luffy tortured the ship's cook and ship's guard, as Jin had been officially assigned, with the best of intentions, the rest of the crew went about their hobbies. The screams of mercy and death threats from their two newest nakama provided an amusing background noise. A nervous pelican found itself the object of Nami's ire, as it waited dutifully for more payment. "Are you kidding me? They increased the prices again?" Nami waved her arms about, generating annoyance and hacky almost unconsciously, which of course made the bird even more frightened. Reluctantly, her thirst for knowledge triumphing over her avarice in a bloody victory, Nami withdrew another coin and dropped it in the pelican's pouch. The fee paid, the bird allowed the scary woman to take a newspaper before it took to the skies at a full aviation sprint. Usopp, who was doing his mad scientist impression, looked up from his current work. "I don't see why you're still so stingy, Nami. It's not like you need to save up to free your village anymore." Nami glared at the marksman as if he had just thrown a bloody carcass at her. "That's my point, Usopp. Now I get to keep every cent for myself." Usopp shook his head, and returned to his latest concoction. Zoro was training insanely, as per usual. Shirtless and drenched in sweat, the swordsman was lifting massive weights in each hand and swinging them like swords, whilst holding a smaller weight with his teeth and maintaining perfect balance. In a parallel dimension, Zoro just did calisthenics and two-armed swings. This Zoro, who had his eyes open to just how big the power gaps could be between him and someone from the Grand Line, trained as obsessively and psychotically as he had when he was training to fight Kuina. Zoro had attained a state of ultimate focus. Every twitch of his muscles was noted, compensated, and otherwise used to help the greater whole. The world had shrunk to himself and his weights, the outside world nothing more than a set of distractions that he paid no heed. 7,896, 7,897, the man gasped to himself, while his inner thoughts reflected on his comparative weakness. I couldn't even touch Mahawk. My haki was all but worthless against those mermen. I cannot plateau. I refuse to. I have to keep getting stronger, faster, better, so that I can have that match with Luffy and win. With that mental rant, Zoro upped his training up a notch, starting to move through his various kata while balancing the half-metric-ton weights. Sanji and Jin were huddled together near the aft. The two of them were honestly quivering in their boots. Where is he? Where is he? Where the hell is he? Jin muttered to himself, his eyes swiveling in their sockets like a madman's. Jin had developed a constant tic on his left eye, and his tonfa were jittering from his shaking hands, completing the image of mental institute escapee. I don't know, we'd better make a break for it now. There has to be an island nearby, or something, Sanji muttered back, seriously considering jumping ship. A second bout with starvation on a deserted island would be preferable to this freaking ship of psychotic, well-intentioned horrors. However, before the two recruits from the Bharati could flee to the ocean's cold embrace, they were discovered by a living nightmare. Wow, you guys are already trying to run away. Even Usopp lasted longer than this. Whatever, let's continue, with that Luffy, who had been hanging from the rigging directly above the pair, through the latest in a long line of mild blasts of haki. In some dark, bipolar corner of Luffy's soul, the semi-sociopath part that came out when he got dead serious was laughing his ass off as Sanji and Jin flew through the air. Dance, little flies, dance. Luffy mentally locked his other half in a padded cell. Seriously, why was that guy always ruining his mood? He was handy in a fight, but was terrible everywhere else. It was so much more fun to act dumb than all arrogant like that. Perhaps we should elaborate rather than simply leaving you with that. As we all know, Luffy is, in general, an utter moron, except on the battlefield, where he becomes a genius. Well, add haki to the mix, and that divide takes on a life of its own. As Luffy was growing up, he slowly split his personality into two literal halves. The first, dominant half is happy, Luffy. This Luffy avoids using his surprisingly large intellect, merely because it's more fun to go with the flow. He refuses to understand the simplest things because he rarely ever actually needs the information, and because others' reactions are hilarious. Slow, but entertained. That is, happy, Luffy. Then there's the other half, whom is currently imitating Crypt Ugakari. This half acts like an overzealous bodyguard. It is aware of Luffy's great power, and the threat it represents is sent out of control. Therefore, it acts to remove any and all threats before drastic measures are needed. This is why it normally comes out during fights, to combat enemies that could kill him. However, this half also sees Luffy's nakama as potential threats. The emotional backlash if they died or betrayed Luffy would be catastrophic. Therefore, it constantly tries to convince its host that it is much better to act like a dictator and reduce his friends to nothing more than servants, with the lack of emotional care pertaining. And, if he did it with his nakama, why not just go all the way and enslave the world? Naturally, Luffy ignores this half's suggestions. However, it wasn't as simple as an on-off switch. Luffy could be tempted, just like any other human being. His pure heart made it unlikely, but the possibility was still there. That's why Luffy tried to avoid any serious use of haki. The rush of the power always strengthened the voice of his dark side. But the dichotomy of Monkey D. Luffy isn't important right now. We were laughing as he trained Sanji and Jin. Without even looking up, Usopp leaned to the side as Sanji flew through the space he once occupied. He hadn't cracked Nami's trick of seeing the future. It was just that predictable, "Oi, Luffy, try to aim somewhere else. This is my super powerful deluxe Tabasco star. If anyone gets hit in the eyes with this, it would be a catastrophe." Luffy cocked his head to the side. Catastrophe? That sounded cool. Before Luffy could begin his usual destructive idiocy, however, Zoro finished his workout with a massive strike from all three weights. The slipstream in displaced air was enough to send the featherweight ball of evil spicy doom right out of Usopp's fingers and straight into his eyes. The marksman stood still for a second, in a moment of orderly shock. Then the pain kicked in. An inferno that was as tall as some mountains flew up from Usopp's face, and the extravagant coward went through the standard procedure for such events. Running around at supersonic speeds, screaming his ass off. My eyes are burning. Someone please gouge them out or something. Throw me into the sea. Stick my head in the freezer. Do something, you crazy maniacs. Luffy was laughing so hard that his rubber body was literally shrinking since he was using so much air, like an empty water bottle when someone keeps sucking. Sanji and Jin, while recovering slightly faster than they had the previous episode, were still too indisposed to help their nakama. Zoro calmly toweled himself off. knowing that an actual shower was an unattainable luxury, before throwing his sweaty towel with incredible accuracy straight into Usopp's face. It was unhygienic, sure, but the salty sweat immediately doused the burning. As Usopp debated whether to be grateful or disgusted, Nami looked up from her paper, which she had been reading from the entire time. "Would you all just calm down? I'm trying to relax here." Nami shook her head before returning to the news. "The world's going crazy. The Gover's slipping. There's a rebellion on St. Elba's right now. The revolutionaries are getting more active, the price on coal's going up. Luffy's got a wanted poster." Nami froze. Blinked. Looked back at the article she had just skimmed, complete with the notorious "dead or alive" sign. Not Luffy stared back at her, his eyes as cold and all-consuming as death, every line of his boyish face frozen with grim authority and ferocious anger. Even though the photo was hazy, Nami still felt a chill run up her spine. It didn't matter if she faced off against this man or served beneath him. His true face was still something that would haunt her darker dreams. Then, she realized the seriousness of what she was seeing. "Everyone," Nami yelled, her fear and anxiety so tumultuous that she'd imbued her voice without noticing. Everyone immediately ceased what they were doing and paid attention. Nami tore the poster from its loose stitching into the paper and showed it to the crew. Almost all of them at least raised an eyebrow, while Usopp was more elaborate in his reaction. Luffy just narrowed his eyes. Seeing what he became when he listened to his other made him agitated. As Zoro took the poster from her hands to take a closer look, Nami turned back to the paper and read the article alongside it. That alone was disconcerting. Very rarely did a pirate get recognized that much as a rookie. Monkey D. Straw Hat Luffy has made an explosive debut into the dark world of piracy. He has not been active for a month, and yet he has already gathered a highly talented crew of various specialties and faced down and defeated the 3 largest bounties in the East Blue. Background checks failed to turn up evidence of how it is he has amassed such power so quickly. Scattered witnesses' reports have revealed odd and disconnected facts as to his true character. One witness all but screamed when interviewed, raving about his bloodthirsty, unforgiving tactics on the battleground. Yet another witness contradicted this, quoting, "He's the most honorable, kindest young man I've ever met. He acted like an excited schoolboy, not some heartless cretin. Now get out of my kitchen." Perhaps most disturbing of all, the recently decommissioned Captain Nezumi swore before his arrests, "He's a devil. A devil in a monster's skin. He's got that evil power, that hacky." Hacky is a mysterious power, misunderstood at the best of times. The greatest marine officers and pirates in history were said to wield its fey abilities. Described poetically as the power of a man's heart and soul, its effects are many and varied. As it is found only in the strongest of body and mind, one can only wonder the true depth of Straw Hat's strength. One thing is for sure. A new power is sailing the seas. Nami looked up from the paper, her skin already pale with fright. "Do you understand what this means? Everywhere we go, people are going to be looking for us." Her words fell on deaf ears. "Woohoo, Luffy's got a bounty. We're wanted now, fame and fortune are ours." Sanji, Usopp, and Luffy were having a victory dance, loudly proclaiming their joy in Captain's newfound notoriety. Jin wasn't as boisterous, but a faint smile colored his lips. "We're on the right track now. I just can't believe that they gave a newbie a bounty this high. 45 million belly. That's some serious cash." Zoro nodded, his hands twitching as he held his swords. "We're going to attract a lot of strong opponents now. We'll get stronger in no time." Feminine fury raged through Nami's veins as she whipped out her staff and expertly gave each of the men a hockey-powered bonk to the head, effectively ending all celebration. Like a row of chastised children, they listened to her as she ranted. "Am I the only sane one on this ship? This is a very bad thing. Bounty hunters and marines will be searching for us from here on out. We'll have to watch our step everywhere we go, or we'll get attacked or arrested or worse." Luffy looked up, and his eyes were different. Nami stopped in her tracks. Luffy was acting serious, and she was supposed to listen. "We'll be okay, Nami. Marines, they fight for justice. Bounty hunters, they fight for money. We're different. You all are with me because, like me, you fight for your dreams. Let them come. We'll show them the strength of our ambition." A fierce grin split Luffy's face, and Nami was struck by just how complex a person he really was. He was so childish at times, yet at others he was a ruthless beast. Yet no matter which face, he always had that adamantine determination, that devotion to what was close to him, be it Nakama or his dream. Nami felt a grin come to her face unbidden, and she let it stay there. "I should have known. Luffy doesn't care about the Marines. He's just too stubborn to let them stop him. Yet another reason why I feel this way." Shaking off her thoughts of her relationship with her captain, Nami got her game face on. "Okay, enough with the bounty. We're all set to go to the Grand Line, but we need to resupply first. I'm not sailing into the pirates' graveyard without being prepared." Pulling out a map from the nebulous dimension that all women seem to have access to, Nami unrolled a sea chart of the local area. allowing everyone to see. We're right here, and Reverse Mountain, the entrance to the Grand Line, is here. Nami indicated first a random patch of ocean, then the only major landmark on the nearby Red Line. The closest port would be Logia Town, the town of the beginning and the end. Ironically enough, it's the place where Gold Roger was both born and executed. Most pirates heading for the Grand Line use it for their last stop. Luffy cocked an eyebrow, and Nami could tell that she'd captured his interest. "Orders, Captain?" she asked in an amused tone, as the rest of the crew came to the same conclusion. Luffy was silent for a moment, before he hopped onto his special seat on the masthead. "The town where Gold Roger was born, and also died, I want to see it." Luffy pointed forward, and yelled, "Full speed ahead, head for Logia Town." At that very moment, a dark stranger in an alley cocked his head. The shadows concealed him, but even with the dim lighting, the pendant he wore proudly around his neck was obvious. It was a piece of obvious craftsmanship, a skull of carved ivory, the head childishly round, with the elongated upper jaw and teeth sticking out from the bottom, almost half the size of the entire piece. Two onyx stones, so lustrous that they glowed even in that low ambience, acted as the eyes. It hung from the stranger's neck by a thin chain of silver. The entire thing looked almost like a keyhole. "The wind brings new whispers, someone important is on the way." Pushing himself off the wall, the tall stranger, a young man judging by his voice, grinned a grin that would make a Cheshire envious. "It takes a particular person to agitate the spirits, so let's see who he is." With that, the man departed, disappearing even deeper into the shadows. The only sign he had even been there were the disembodied whispers only a rare few could hear. "He comes, the future comes." In all customary craziness, the Straw Hats made their way to Logia Town. Over the 5-day period, Sanji grew immune to the hacky. He had even started to use it for himself, though they were merely blinks, as the crew had decided to officially term them. If a crew member let loose a brief, light wave of hacky, then it was a blink. Usopp had tried to start a gag involving blinks and Sanji's one eye, but it had crashed and burned. Jin, on the other hand, was having difficulty. He had developed a resistance to hacky, out of sheer overexposure, but the energy itself remained out of his grasp. Finally, in the middle of one of Luffy's practice sessions, he threw his hands up in defeat. "Forget it, I'm done. I am sick and tired of trying to use some psychic mumbo-jumbo and nothing happening. Just leave me be." This highly uncharacteristic outburst was enough to get everyone's attention, even the religiously devoted Zoro in the middle of a routine. Luffy frowned. "Just great. Now how'd think to figure out the problem." Sitting down cross-legged, Luffy puzzled over why Jin couldn't harness the energies of his spirit. Painstakingly slow Luffy's mind maybe, but it put things together in interesting ways. It took a bit over an hour, but at last Luffy managed to find an answer. "Oi, Jin." The ship's guard looked up from where he had been meditating on the deck. Meditation was a habit he had gotten into, in an attempt to deal with the violent chaos that seemed rampant on the crew. He found it strangely fulfilling. Luffy scratched his head. "I think I figured out why you have more trouble than us. What's your dream?" Jin, surprised by this disconnected question, cocked his head. He opened his mouth, and then closed it as he realized he didn't have an answer. He'd never had a dream or ambition. His entire life had been reacting through duty to Krieg's orders. Luffy, seeing Jin's hesitance, nodded in understanding. "You're the most devoted man I've ever met, Jin. But it's not your own passion that drives you. You follow orders and keep your head down. That is the exact opposite of what's needed in a person for hacky to form." Luffy walked to the rail, and leaned on his elbows as he surveyed the sea. Jin, aware of how rare Luffy's insights appeared, paid close attention. "Hacky is not power, it is command. It is the desire to reshape the world to your liking and the determination to make it happen. Those with the will to cast off such measly chains as reason and expectations, those are the ones who sculpt the world with their own two hands. And among these beacons in a world of gray masses, there are those with the charisma and devotion to tame even those wild souls. Those elite among elite, such as I, wield the power of the Hawashoku, the authority of the Lords of Lords." Luffy turned to Jin, and the fire that burned in the captain's eyes left Jin speechless. Here he saw, for the first time, the true essence of Luffy, the very core of his being. A being that would alter the world around him without a second thought or great difficulty. "Sadly, Jin, you are not one of those pillars. You are just another sheep among shepherds. I do not say this as an insult to your strength. It is simply the way you are. And until you break the mold and build yourself up above your fellow man, you will never be able to keep up with this crew." Luffy walked right up to Jin, and despite the decades separating them, Jin felt as if he were the lesser man. "Grow strong, Jin. Learn to conquer the instincts of your spirit. Become a wolf, not a lamb, and maybe you will rule in the age to come." With that, Luffy's seriousness fell like Galileo's cannonballs. "Oi, Nami, are we there yet?" Jin blinked as the now carefree teen left him to his own devices. Once again, Jin marveled at the character that was Monkey D. Luffy. He was a warrior, a child, and a king, all coexisting within this one youth. it boggled the mind. Shaking his head in stunned bewilderment, Jin set himself upon the task every man must one day face, deciding that which he would give his life for. Luffy grinned. Let's see if that gets him on the right track. Damn, having so many nakama is a lot more responsibility than I figured. Shaking his head of such thoughts, Luffy belatedly realized something was missing. Guys, has anyone seen Thrasher? The crew stopped what they were doing, all of them suddenly aware of a empty feeling in the air. As one, the crew flew to the railing, where alas it was true. The giant silhouette of their favorite Sea King was gone. Now where has that overgrown lizard run off to? Nami muttered, but there wasn't any true venom behind the words. Like the rest of the crew, Nami had grown fond of Thrasher. Once you got used to his size, the serpent was actually a damn good pet. He played when asked, he took care of himself, and he regarded all of them with a fond possessiveness. A bit like an overgrown house cat, with gills and scales, and enough teeth to send dentists into tears of joy at the thought of the bill. Worried at the absence of his aquatic nakama, Luffy sucked in breath and let loose a piercing whistle interlaced with the keening tones of hacky. Usopp's goggles creaked in protest, but the sound served its purpose. Like a rat presented with cheese, Thrasher came at the sound of his master's call. Within minutes the giant sea lizard's head was hovering above them, cocked in confusion. Thrasher, there you are. Where have you been? Luffy asked, his momentary panic replaced by parental curiosity. The response he received, however, merely added to his confusion. Thrasher suddenly seemed to find the sky very interesting, and Luffy could have sworn that the undulations of his long body were the Sea King equivalent of nervous jerking. It was Usopp's sharp eyes that spotted it first. Oi, Thrasher, did you shine your scales? They're a lot shinier today. And when did you clean the rot from your gills? Is that an anemone tucked into your head fin? Said beast's twitching started picking up, and if it weren't for the fact that he was a reptilian monster, the crew could have sworn that he was blushing. Sanji, an expert on this matter, realized in an instant what was going on. Smirking to himself, he lit a cigarette and turned back to the kitchen. I think you should let him go, Luffy. We wouldn't want to keep Thrasher away from his new lady friend, would we? The arrow cook's words sent a shockwave through the crew. Luffy's and Usopp's jaws dropped to the ground. Zoro quirked an eyebrow, and Jin and Nami traded conspiratorial grins. Unable to resist, Nami made a sly remark as she returned to her lounger. Well Luffy, I'd start saving if I were you. It looks like you'll have to start caring for a whole spawn of baby Thrashers in the future. Thrasher glared accusingly at Nami, but he didn't for too long. Instinct still screamed at him to respect the Sea King mother, for she knew best. Though Thrasher was starting to have his doubts on that front, since mothers rarely stayed in disguise for this long. Then again, this could all be an elaborate test of his obedience. Luffy was still gaping. Usopp managed to recover, and wisely decided that this was none of this business. Zoro merely shrugged and returned to his training. Luffy and his pet were left alone, where they could mutually fidget and avoid the issue. Luffy gulped and closed his mouth. Unsure how to deal with this, he did what he usually did. Said the first thing off the top of his head. So, Thrasher. You found a girl? Thrasher, acting remarkably intelligent and defying most laws of animal physiology, nodded tentatively. How long? Luffy asked, his surprise slowly ebbing away into a kind of unwilling pride. Thrasher growled in his throat, and dragged his tail across the surface of the water twice. 2 weeks? Luffy asked, understanding the code perfectly. Once again, his pet Sea King nodded. Well, I guess you should go back. You don't want to keep her waiting. Luffy was happy, he truly was. He'd always worried that Thrasher would stay lonely due to hanging out with him. This was a dream come true. The problem was that Sea Kings were fiercely territorial and clung to their mates like glue. The unions generally only lasted a few weeks, but there were cases of mating for life. Luffy was scared that he might lose Thrasher forever to some random female Sea King. Thrasher looked long and hard at Luffy, whining low within his throat. Luffy could have sworn that, like his own eyes, moisture was beading and threatening to break loose. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Luffy reached out with his rubber limbs and patted Thrasher on the head. Go on, buddy, go back.
Keening slightly, Thrasher brought his head down over the ship and nuzzled his master for what might be the last time. Rubbing his longtime companion in a forced manner, Luffy silently let his tears fall. They stayed that way for a minute, before Thrasher broke away and dived into the sea. The massive lizard looked back once, before diving back into the deeps.
Silently, Luffy wiped his tea happy for Thrasher, but there was a hole in his heart now. The spot that once held Thrasher close was now hollow. In the confines of his mind, Luffy heard the whispers begin. He didn't have the strength to ignore them. This is what loss feels like. This is heartbreak. Imagine what it would feel like if one of your nakama left you. Imagine how it would hurt to have Usopp or Zoro or Nami just walk away. You can't let that happen. Get rid of them now. Break them and leave them broken. They can't hurt you then. They can't make you feel like this. Luffy took in a shuddering breath. Shut up, he thought simply, before pushing the darkness back into its cage. If he broke his nakama, they wouldn't be able to hurt him, he'd already be dead. Damaging them would only serve to hurt him even worse than if they'd abandoned him. That's what Luffy tried to tell himself, at least. Nami, sensing something was wrong, looked over at Luffy. When she saw the utter hurt in his eyes, her heart felt like it was dunked in acid. Luffy, she thought, concerned and something more breaking free without her consent or disagreement. She silently came up behind her captain and did the only thing she really could do. She hugged him. She held him close and let him know that people still cared for him. The crew left them alone. They hadn't anticipated how hard Thrasher's departure would hurt him, and they knew anything on their part would just make it worse. Nami alone had the power to calm Luffy down. After a minute of soaking up the warmth and comfort of Nami's embrace, Luffy calmly broke out of her embrace. He gave her a small smile, before returning to his special seat. With that, the young pirate captain fell asleep, his dreams full of shadows and choking water, all held at bay by a soft orange light. They docked into Logia town with little fanfare. Everyone apart from Jin had things they wanted to do in the city. The former fleet commander explained that, as both ship's guard and a man who'd already made the motions of going to the Grand Line, it was best if he stay with the ship. Luffy was determined to get out of his recent slump by seeing the view from the top of the execution platform. Seeing the last view Gold Roger had ever had would certainly lift his spirits. Nami and Usopp both had some shopping to do. Sanji was eager to sample both the town's fish market and the female inhabitants, and Zoro, much to his displeasure, was off to replace his lost swords with a loan from Nami. Before they all dispersed, Luffy, for once, had some good advice. Listen, everyone stop what they were doing, warned by the serious note in Luffy's voice that they should listen. Looking each of them in the eye, he spoke with the shadowed guilt of past experience. Whatever you do not lose control. To us, it's just a joke or something to help a point. But to these people, it's the end of the world. It is the attack on their very souls that they have nightmares about. So I say again, do not lose control. None of the crew had to ask what he was talking about, and with that, the crew entered Logia town.